Have you ever wondered how you can get into professional investments without, being a millionaire? Well, a really popular way to do that is through something called a unit trust. It's basically a way for a whole bunch of people to pool their money and invest together. So today, we're going to dive deep into a specific type, Sharia-compliant unit trusts, breaking down exactly how they work and what makes them, well, different.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle the big idea behind what a unit trust even is. Then we'll meet the team, the people who actually run the show. After that, we'll get into the really interesting part. What puts the Sharia in Sharia compliant? Then we'll check out the menu of investment options. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the kind of mindset you need to be a successful investor.
All right, let's get right to it. At its heart, what exactly is a unit trust? Let's break it down.
I want you to imagine this. You want to own little pieces of a bunch of big, successful companies, but you don't have a ton of cash to start with. So how do you get a seat at that big table? Well, that is the exact problem that unit trusts were created to solve.
A unit trust is what's called a collective investment. And honestly, the financial potluck analogy is just perfect. Think about it. A lot of people each put some money into one big pot. Then, a professional fund manager takes all that pooled cash and uses it to build a really diverse portfolio, something that one small investor probably couldn't do on their own.
So what's the main goal here? Well, it's all about generating returns, both from dividends and from the value of the investments growing over time. These funds are really built for medium to long-term goals. And when you invest, you're called a unit holder, and you're essentially relying on the expertise of professional managers to handle all the tricky market stuff for you.
Okay, but this whole thing doesn't just run by itself, right? Behind the scenes, there's a key team of players making it all happen. So, let's meet the crew.
It all comes down to this three-way relationship. First, there's you, the investor, or the unit holder. Then you've got the manager, who makes all the investment decisions. And finally, there's the trustee, who's there to protect the money. All of their responsibilities to each other are legally laid out in a super important document called a trust deed.
So as the unit holder, your role is pretty straightforward. You're the investor. You own units in the fund, and every single unit has the exact same value. And how do they figure out that value? Simple. They take the total value of everything the fund owns and just divide it by the total number of units out there. Next up, we have the manager. This is the company that does all the heavy lifting. It's their job to manage that big pot of money with skill and integrity, making those critical calls on what to buy, what to sell, and when to do it. They're the experts trying to squeeze the best possible performance out of the fund.
And finally, the trustee. You should think of them as your watchdog. They are approved by the Securities Commission, or SC, and they act as the official keeper, the custodian of all the fund's assets. Their main job is to make sure the manager is playing by the rules in the trust deed and, most importantly, to protect your interests as a unit holder.
Okay, so we've covered what a unit trust is and who's who in the zoo, but what makes one Sharia compliant? This is where things get really specific and, honestly, pretty fascinating. The very first step is a super strict screening process. A Sharia-compliant fund is not allowed to invest in any business that's involved in prohibited activities. We're talking about things like riba, which means interest-based services like you'd find in conventional banking, but also industries like gambling, alcohol, or non-halal food production. Now, you might be asking, who makes sure all these rules are actually being followed? Well, that brings us to a key figure who has the final say on everything, the Sharia advisor. The Sharia advisor is involved in pretty much everything. They give advice on all parts of the business. They go through all the transactions to make sure they're compliant, and they even write up a formal report that goes into the company's annual statements. Basically, nothing gets the green light unless the Sharia advisor has signed off on it. So these funds generally work in one of two ways. The most common one is called wakala. It's an agency model. It's kind of like you're hiring an expert, the manager, and you pay them a fee for their service. The other model, which you see less often, is mudarabah. That's more of a profit-sharing partnership, where you and the manager agree up front on how you'll split any profits that are made. All right, now that we get the structure, let's look at the actual menu. What kind of funds can you invest in, and maybe more importantly, what are the costs involved? You actually have a pretty wide variety to choose from, depending on your goals and how much risk you're comfortable with. You've got equity funds, which are mostly stocks. There are fixed income funds that focus on Islamic bonds. Balanced funds give you a mix of both. And you can even find property funds or money market funds for shorter-term goals.
Of course, investing isn't free, so let's talk costs.
You'll usually see an initial service fee right when you invest. Then there's an ongoing annual management fee that pays for the manager's hard work. And sometimes, if you use a financial planner, there might be an advisory fee. It's really important to understand these fees before you jump in.
So we've covered the what, the who, and the how. Let's finish up with what might be the most important part of all, the right mindset to have as an investor.
So after all that, what is the number one takeaway? I think it's captured perfectly in this one idea. Success in long-term investing isn't about chasing hot stocks or getting emotional. It's about having a disciplined, methodical approach.
And that line of thinking leads directly to what's known as the buy and hold strategy. Look, unit trusts are not for short-term gambles. They're designed to work best over the medium to long term. We're talking at least 3 years. The real trick is to stay disciplined when the market gets rocky and not get scared off by price swings. Trying to perfectly time the market, it's incredibly risky and almost never works out for the average person.
And there you have it, our complete breakdown of Sharia-compliant unit trusts from the basic idea to the key players and principles. You've got the framework now to understand how it all works. So the final question isn't just, is this right for me, but really, what role could this kind of disciplined, ethical investing play on your own financial journey?